Hello and welcome to another episode of Finding Your Atom. This is the episode 6 and we have with us a very special guest, Dirk Collier. So I'm here with Amrita Sen, and like in our series, we are discussing what makes us special. How do you find our atomic particulars that makes us special in terms of humanity? How we find our humanity, and as well how we can actually cross-bridge the different atomic parts of the human nature. And this implies a lot of things, from finding our dots to finding our inner atom identifier, the atom particles, and a lot of subjects that mix physics, psychology, and ideas and philosophy. So we've been very focused in trying to identify these different things, and especially profiling people that we deeply admire, and we are very excited. So Amrita today will be co-hosting this special episode, and then we'll go in there. I'm just going to read a bit about our special guest. So Dirk Collier is a fascinating personality. He's an author, lecturer, and expert in Asian and Indian culture. His passion for Asian culture and history has aroused as a result of his travels through the continent, predominantly in China and India. And apart from the books, he has also written articles for various journals, on occasional lectures on universities and cultural institutions. He's a professional lawyer and a businessman, and serves on the board of several organizations. But his background is as well world known as an author of multiple books. He published The Emperor's Writings, a historical novel on the life and times of Akbar the Great, which you're going to be talking today. In 2013 came his essay Paths to Peace, Religion, Ethics and Tolerance in a Globalizing World, which are more important than ever today. And he has a foreword by His Excellency Herman van Rompuy, honorary President of the European Council. And in 2015, he published The Great, a non-fiction chronicle of one of the greatest dynasties in world history, the Mughal, from its founder Babur to Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last of the clan. So we can go for a lot of different things, and of course we're going to put the bio for people listening to us, but I urge people to buy the books and read the books, because there's a lot of fascinating things about history that are more important than ever today. So I'll pass the word to Amrita, because she'll be the first host, and I will be, of course, provoking with this wonderful journey that you're going to have today.
Well, I'll tell you how I found Dirk. I was in India in a hotel in Calcutta and visiting my grandfather. And there was a person sitting next to us who started talking about different concepts of peace and different concepts of humanity. And I asked him, I said, where did you get these quotes? He said, well, I've been reading this book called The Emperor's Writings, his notes of Akbar the Great. I said, Akbar wrote these sayings? He said, no, the author wrote it as if Akbar would have written it. And that I thought was interesting in and of itself, is the author is imagining what this historical figure would have written, and the prose was so beautiful. It's as if Akbar himself wrote these notes to his son. So he said, read the book, went back home, came back to LA, read the book, and then I said, you know what, let me give it a shot. Maybe this is a TV show, maybe it's something I can produce. I reached out to the author, thinking that no one would actually respond, and here he is 3 years later. 3 years later, I would like to say that I'm proud to say Dirk is a friend. He and I are working on a television concept related to an amalgamation of his books, and we've gotten the attention of very, very prominent showrunners to do this. And since that time, he's published 2 more books since the time I met him. I read a second book, and the thing I think the audience should really try to appreciate here is the fact that most people who've written about Mughal history, which is a Game of Thrones period in Indian history, are Indian in descent. There's a few exceptions, but most people who have written about this time period in India are Indian. What I'd like Dirk to explain what got him from Europe with the curiosity that he went into India. And then all of a sudden, he's this, in my view, he's an expert. He is an absolute expert in this category. So I'd like us to hear about what compelled him, what compelled him to get to this point.
Well, as you've explained, I'm a Belgian. My native language is Dutch, Southern Dutch, to be precise. I'm a lawyer by training, and I have an executive MBA, and I worked for the better part of my life for Johnson and Johnson. And apart from working for a living and running marathons when I was a bit younger, I have throughout my life been absolutely obsessed with books. I have thousands and thousands of books, and I'm proud to say that I read many of them. And so, yeah, that's what my life was about. And when I talk about books, history in particular fascinates me. And there was one particular point about history and about the lives of people, very often bad people that I came across. One aspect that fascinated and horrifies me is fanaticism. There is a French philosopher that once said that nothing is more dangerous than an idea, especially if you have only one. And history abounds with examples of people who could have lived just ordinary lives, perfectly ordinary, valuable lives, but instead they became monsters for some reason. And one guy that I've read about was, for instance, Heinrich Himmler, the boss of the SS. And many people know that he has the blood of many millions of people on his hands, but few people know that when he was an adolescent, he was a church-going, honest-to-God person, extremely devout and so on. Very few people know that he was extremely meticulous in the way he behaved, even when he was butchering people. If he took a pencil from his office, the cost of that pencil needed to be deducted from his salary. If he went to visit his mother, the gasoline price for the detour had to be deducted from his salary. So this is a guy that could have been a notary public or a pharmacist or whatever, a mild-mannered, meticulous, scrupulous person, and he became a butcher. And why was that? Because his mind got poisoned with a lot of idiotic things about Aryans and blue eyes and the fight of good blood against bad blood and so on. And the guy became convinced that he had to play a role in eradicating what he thought was degenerate blood and so on and so forth. So I thought to myself when I was about 35 years old, which unfortunately is a few centuries ago, that some day later in life, I would start writing a book, and it would be a novel about fanaticism. And I had this vague idea that I would write a book about European history, about some guy working for the Spanish Inquisition and chasing crypto Jews and crypto Muslims and torturing them, and then discovering that even if, just supposing that his Catholic ideas were true, that what he did was actually wrong, because those human beings, even if they were mistaken in their Muslim or Jewish belief, were people like he was. And that, so my story was going to be about a fanaticist, and I was going to write it around age 60. And then when I was in my mid-40s, my work for J&J took me to Asia. Dozens of times I've been to China and India, and as is my habit, I always came back with truckloads of books, which I started reading. And the more I read about Asian history and philosophy, the more fascinated I got. So I discovered, for instance, that a lot of thought that I had been told Aristotle and Plato and so on had discovered, that they had been discovered as well, and often many hundreds of years ago, before Aristotle, by Indians, by Chinese, and so on. So the value of that philosophy struck me, and also the maturity of thought. So I could give many examples, but in the Arthashastra, for instance, a book about how to run a country, written many centuries before the Common Era, how well thought through it was. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting that my novel would in some way, shape, or form have to do something with Asia and with India? And I thought to myself, yeah, well, the Portuguese actually had a possession in India, Goa, not a sizable chunk of India, but nevertheless larger than many a European country, which they owned, which they were kicked out of after India's independence only, so which they ran. And I started, I don't speak Portuguese, but I can actually read it quite well. And I started documenting myself, and I discovered to my joy that the Portuguese had a very active Inquisition in Goa. So I thought to myself, my inquisitor will not be stationed in Europe, but he will be stationed in India, and he can have Indian victims, so I can weave in all these insights of Indian philosophy and of the tolerance and so on, and it's gonna be great. Because actually, it's not because you're here, Amrita, but there is a huge difference between the concept of what I would call Western religions, Christianity, Islam, and to a lesser extent Judaism. They're obsessed with orthodoxy. So that what they actually say is there is only one God, and he's the boss, and he will punish all the evil and reward all the good. And you better do what he says. And if you don't do what he says according to this book and not the other guy's book, you will be punished for all eternity. So a huge accent on orthodoxy. Whereas Indian philosophy, if you read about it, basically has no creed that you actually have to believe in. Indian philosophy is about how to become a better, more mature person, so that in the end you will be freed and you can reunite yourself. But in the end, according to Indian philosophy, everything is destined to reunite itself with its divine origin, and every religion is just a path on the same mountain. So in that sense, a true Hindu is by definition a person respectful of other traditions and very open-minded. And that was something that I wanted to put in that book. So I started reading about Goan history, and then I was annoyed to see that very important in that history was that the great Mughal at that time, a few, maybe 100, 150 miles beyond the borders of Goa, had invited Jesuit priests to his court. It was Sunni Muslim, but he had invited Jesuit priests to his court and allowed them to build a chapel and started praying in that chapel, causing these fathers to believe that he would convert to Catholicism, but then they were very sad to see that he also built Hindu shrines in his palace, and that he built Zoroastrian fires and what have you, and was respectful of each and every religion. So reluctantly, I started reading up about this man. And in the end, I thought, I'm going to give up the entire story, and I'm going to just try to get into the mind of this man. And you have many, you call it original, Amrita, and that's very flattering, but it's in fact not a novel concept at all. Like, for instance, I Claudius, Robert Graves's I Claudius is actually Claudius on the brink of death, explaining his story. If you have Marguerite Yourcenar's Memoirs of Hadrian, about Hadrian, the Roman emperor. That's exactly the same. It's him writing a very lengthy letter to one of his successors, explaining to him how his life went and how he actually should go about managing at that time the most powerful empire on the face of the globe, and how he went about it and what his mistakes were and so on. So what I did was, when I read about this Akbar, what I knew is that unfortunately he had only three sons. Two of them died from alcoholism before him. He had just one son left, also an alcoholic, and that guy actually rebelled against him. And in the end, he managed to patch up things and get reconciled with his son, but the son was really his rival, a bitter rival, and that really must have been terrible for him. But when he was dead, when Akbar was dead, it turned out that his son was extremely respectful of what his father had done. And if you read Jahangir was his son and successor, Jahangir's memoirs, it's full of quotes about my revered father here and my revered father there. And also Jahangir, for instance, when it came to religion, had a statement, just like in my father's empire, there is room for every denomination and every religion. It's just like in the spacious circles of God's mercy, there is room for everything. That type of thing, that type of insight was at that time, it's even right now, not an obvious insight, but at that time, if you compare it to Europe, we were fighting like hell, Protestants against Catholics. There were fires, there were torture chambers, and this guy actually created the first secular states, as far as I know, or one of the first secular states on the face of the globe.
Yeah, giving people some context, Dirk. So it is the year around 1556 that Akbar came into power. His grandfather was Babur, who was a Uzbek, right?
No, he actually was kicked out of Central Asia by the Uzbeks. No.
Okay, so he was not Uzbek. He was.
No. He was a Turk, a Central Asian Turk, a Chagatai Turk, to be precise.
So he had lots of ups and downs in his career. Came to India to essentially because he has nowhere else to go. Then his son Humayun, Akbar's father, started expanding the kingdom and died, literally died.
He got kicked out of his kingdom by one of his rivals, and then spent the better part of a decade in exile, and came back to India with Persian help after this rival of his had died. And then he died in a stupid accident.
He died in an accident. Akbar
was 13 years of age when he inherited the throne of his father. And when he inherited that throne, you should know that he was there at the head of an invading Muslim army, Central Asian, Turkish-speaking army. And his entire government was Muslims, either Persians or Central Asians. And that's it. When he was older, more than half of his government was Hindu. He had married by that time a Hindu princess of a very powerful Rajput clan, which actually caused him to become much more mighty, because he was not the first Muslim to marry a Hindu princess. But Hindu princesses who married Muslim kings were supposed to be turned Muslim, and the entire family was supposed to convert. And that he did not do. So he allowed his family to remain Hindu, and all of a sudden you had Hindus commanding Muslim troops and joint armies of Hindus and Muslims, and that was the backbone of what at that time was the most powerful empire on the face of the globe, because he was actually at that time boss of, give or take a few percent, 20% of the world's population.
Right.
And so at that time, countries that we in Europe considered to be mighty countries paled into insignificance. I mean, one of Akbar's wives was actually a trader and was supposed to be personally more wealthy than the entire treasury of Spain, for instance. So we should realize, we Europeans, but many people throughout the world have a preconceived idea that Europe was at that time so
No.
powerful. It was not. It's only because of military technology that the Europeans in the end gained for a brief period of time predominance in the world. But at the time of Akbar, he was actually the mightiest and the richest.
The richest man in the world. Okay, so Dirk, Akbar, 13 years old, right?
Yeah.
He has lots of enemies. He has a basic infrastructure of government, as you pointed out, and he has a very unique military leader as his mentor, Bahram Khan, right?
Yeah.
13-year-old Akbar, he doesn't know it yet, but he's about to change the concept of basically a cohesive society at that time entirely. One where he's about to change the concept of a multi-religious society, which is ahead for him. This is a very unique person.
Yeah, he did it also to serve himself. I should be honest and point that out to you, that he was so tolerant because he was such an imperialist, and he understood much more than his successors did that it was actually by creating India, a united India, he could make it powerful. Right. As long as he was there as an invading foreigner suppressing the local people, he was not going to make it. And so the first thing he did when he was still around 20 years old was to suppress any taxation on non-Muslims.
That's right. That's right.
First of all, there was a tax on religious services other than Muslim. He abolished that tax. And then secondly, there was a tax, the so-called jizya, so-called a protection tax for non-Muslims that needed to be paid, which he abolished too, endangering his own throne because he had a lot of internal opposition. But nevertheless, he pushed it through. And at the end of, he had to reckon with uprisings and so on, but in the end, he always prevailed. And in the end, he was untouchable. And what he actually created was what he said he would do. He no longer made any kind of distinction between any of his subjects on the basis of their religion. He only intervened in a few items which he thought were not correct. Like, for instance, it is said, and I don't know to what extent he was able to push it through, but he was against circumcision in the sense that 12-year-olds in the Muslim culture and newly born. Well, he was against that. He said, if you want to cut off something, do it when you're an adult and you decide for yourself. It was also very customary, especially among Hindus, that newborn children were married to each other. So families, well-to-do families decided, you got a daughter, I got a son. So they're both 6 months old, so they're married now. And he said, no, marriage is a very important decision to make. So you need to be an adult, which in his time was 14 years old. You need to be 14 years old and you need to decide for yourself. So concepts that, with the wisdom of hindsight, are quite modern. And those were the few exceptions where we actually intervened in religious affairs and said, this custom that you have here, burning widows, for instance, was forbidden. All these kinds of things that he considered to be, not illuminated by the torch of reason. He once said, when he organized this religious debate, when the fathers, the Jesuits wanted to convince him, or his own Muslim theologists, I'm sorry, but I do not wish to take a single step on the path of belief unless that step is enlightened by the torch of reason. So in that sense, he was an extremely modern person. Even in this day and age, it's not that customary to find that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And yeah, your question was how did it come about that it was lost? Well, his successor was not so interested as he was in religious matters, but he basically thought, my father is right and there is no God anyway. Was most certainly an atheist.
Mhm.
But then later on, the son of Jahangir and moreover the grandson of Jahangir were very staunchly educated Sunni Muslims who really reverted to create a dual society. And that was also the beginning of the end of the Mughal Empire, because in the end it ruined the cohesion.
Yeah.
Although the ideal of a united India has never died in itself, but it's never been realized, or only in a patchy way it's been realized.
So Dirk, it's clear that you and many, I would still call you a historian, even though you don't call yourself a historian. We understand better what created these historical milestones, the result of this pro-cohesion advocacy, if you will. What I think we should try to do is understand that thoughts create history, but what creates the thought, right? The thought of a 13-year-old boy who evolves into this, almost before many centuries before the Enlightenment is in full effect in Europe. What created the thought? Was the thought an amalgamation of many influences coming from Persia and Europe and other parts of the world? Or are there times where the thought is just divined within a person? I think it makes sense for us to explore that. Is what creates these ideas? Are ideas just simply a happenstance of what is happening anyway around that?
Your guess is as good as mine, but I think personally that it has to do with most people like to be comfortably away from problems. And so, for instance, when it comes to cuisine, I don't know, but you have a number of people who will try anything and everything wherever they are. And if it's a snake or a cricket or whatever, they want to taste it because they've never eaten a spider, and over here they actually serve it. So they're very open-minded and they want to discover everything for themselves. Most people, however, sooner or later stick to stuff they know. And the great danger of any ideology, it's not only religion, but any ideology, is that it actually gives you the false message that you no longer have to think for yourself. All the answers are here in this book. So why don't you just do what, and then everything goes well. And that's how fanaticism arises. There's this guy, Jaruzelski, had this aphorism defining ideology. It's the mistaken belief that your beliefs are neither beliefs nor mistaken. So you actually have a set of rules, which you probably misunderstood yourself, but this is the book to live by, and that is going to simplify my life. The only thing that we know from history is that whenever you do it, it gets worse and worse. In Christianity, you had Catholics and all kinds of Protestant denominations killing each other. If you go to my youth, when the Soviet Union still existed, you had Trotskyists, you had Stalinists, you had Maoists, you had all kinds of people saying, communism is true, communism is wrong. Current Islam, the Shias are not real Muslims. It's only us that are the real Muslims. This is a tendency that is inside every person's head, because every person's head wants simple answers. And the problem is that the problem, but also the beauty of life is that, okay, there is a truth, obviously, but truth is a multifaceted thing. And the more open you are to whatever meaningful person has to say to you, the more rich your life becomes, and the more constructive you can be.
So, is it safe to say that most human beings are walking ideologies? And even in our day, in modern business, you have most people I know are walking ideologies of some specific path they've chosen, right? In the case of Akbar, would you say he's a mutation of humanity? Where he just is one of those ants that went off?
Oh, it existed all along. Like, for instance, if you take as an example, not that Akbar was not a saint, and the guy that I'm about to mention was not a saint either, but Deng Xiaoping, for instance, who suffered tremendously in the cultural revolution under Mao. So was thrown in jail or banned twice, had a son handicapped for life in incidents with revolutionary guards and so on. The guy was a pragmatist. And so he had these slogans about finding the truth from facts. And the opposite was the Red Guards was we no longer need any books anymore. We've got the thought of Chairman Mao, and whatever we do needs to be in conformity with Chairman Mao, even if Chairman Mao had not thought about the issue at. So it's the tendency to become mentally lazy instead of saying, okay, I need to discover the truth from facts. I need to quote Deng Xiaoping, I need to cross the river trying to find the stones, one step at a time. Pragmatism as such is a more difficult choice, but in the end, it always leads to more, honest kinds of, and that is probably also the appeal of true democracy, that it invites people to disagree.
Yeah.
That honest people can actually find some truth in the ideology of others. But as soon as you say, okay, I'm a socialist and this guy is a liberal, so therefore your mind is closed. Minds are sometimes compared to parachutes. They work better when they're open.
So I have one question. So you've been researching these big characters, bigger than life, and these personalities, and you made a couple of parallels in history. And I think, like you just said, one of the conclusions was kind of most of these kind of obsessions to simplify things and sometimes laziness create these kind of monster states, like you mentioned with Himmler, that from an accounting perspective became a monster that actually was responsible for probably one of the worst times in the history of humanity. And then you talk about India, where actually in this case, we had a personality that actually in one end created something good because he saw that putting people together and putting the religion aside, but making them worked pretty well. So in these different parts of history, what would be the patterns that let's say, if you look at the concept of this podcast that is about finding your atom, so from the different personalities that you analyze and research in history, is there any patterns that you want to share with us, both with the best, what makes the best of these personalities and the worst? Because I think that's normally what happened, even what is happening right now in the present days with Russia. We have a big challenge that is normally it's one person that actually can create most of the times or wonderful times. I would like to see if you have any patterns that you found in your research.
I don't know about this atom thing, but what I believe is that true greatness arises when you are great enough to see yourself not just as a bundle of entitlements, but also of duties. True great people actually say, what is my purpose in life? It's not to become wealthy or to become but I have a task to fulfill. And for instance, many books about political philosophy speak about the duties of a monarch. And it's actually, you're not a monarch for your own right, you're a monarch to serve the people, to serve the country that you are privileged to lead. And in that sense, I have already said and admitted that Akbar was by no means a saint. He actually was an imperialist, and he wanted to make his empire bigger and bigger and bigger. And if countries that were adjacent didn't agree to join him, he would just overrun them. So that in that sense, he was not such a great person, but he at least understood be a successful monarch, not only by being a successful military guy, but also by ruling over a country truthfully, justly, and actually try to create the happiness of the people that he ruled. So looking after the creation of wealth, for instance, his grandson Shah Jahan, usually seen as the pinnacle of Mughal history, actually robbed his own country blind. He created thrones and monuments that were so expensive at the expense of the ordinary people. A guy like Akbar tried not to overtax people, tried to make sure that the country was wealthy in itself, and a wealthy country with happy people tends to be a powerful country. That in itself, serving a greater purpose, is, I think, what is necessary if you want to find an atom. If the atom is just you, then your life is never going to be a great life.
But I think what we're trying to understand, are these just patterns in history, or is this a person that's such a mutation in thought, right? When you look at what the world, the wars, the conflicts that are going on today, a lot of people would argue that they're just repeats of patterns. I think what you found, Dirk and Akbar, is that it went off a path that the world was already on, right? It mutated to something that the world had not seen before. And it really behooves us to understand why those mutations happen so we can create a better.
But he was not the first illuminated guy. You should realize that, for instance, when he was young, Sikhism arose as a kind of merger between Islam and Hinduism. You realize that the predominant denomination of Muslim saints were Sufis, actually open to everyone, who had readily took on Hindu disciples and so on. So it was not that special. The only thing that was special about him was that he actually recognized that to be more valuable than called righteousness of belonging to the true faith. And his contacts with Hindus, he, for instance, he even had an old Brahmin priest who was forbidden to enter his palace, not by Akbar, but by the priest himself, because it was not a suitable place for a Brahmin priest. He was hoisted up in a net of ropes, hoisted up to the window to teach Akbar what he was wanting to know about Hinduism and so on. So the fact that he was open-minded, he was not the first open-minded, and fortunately also not the last open-minded person on the face of the fortunate thing was that he was an open-minded person who was powerful. And you have similar periods, for instance, if you take the Roman Empire, and I refer to the memoirs of Hadrian, there is this sequence of strong emperors in just a brief moment in time in the Roman Empire. Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Pius, all these guys were extremely powerful, and yet they submitted themselves to the greater good. So the Roman law said that the duty of the law is to give every person his or her own due. And so the remit of an emperor is to make sure that actually happens. And if you are that kind of person, all of a sudden you create a period in Roman history that was unequal. But it was the predecessors of these guys, and unfortunately the successors of these guys were monsters. So that's then the discovery of Montesquieu and others, and of democracy in general. You never should allow, as a country, to have your own fate to be determined by a single individual, because it may every once in a while be the wrong individual.
Yeah.
It happened to Germany, like it's happening to Russia currently.
Yeah.
A single individual becomes too powerful and there is no checks and balances, then a country is on a very slippery slope. If you have an all-powerful person who is a saint, then the country will do well. But if the person is for some reason deranged, or a balance of power is needed if you want the society to prosper, and if you want the world to be safe. And
you had in Akbar an open-minded person who had a platform and who had access to ideas.
Yeah.
Right? So
and it was looking for these ideas because currently everyone has access to ideas.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the world is full of illuminated people.
Right. Well, now that's the thing. So in the triangle, right? Open-minded person, access to ideas, platform. Now what you have in our society is you do have access to ideas, where you didn't potentially in those days. But you don't have open-minded people, and the people that are open-minded may not have the platform to speak about their ideas. So you have to have, being born into an imperialistic family is a platform, right? What you do has consequence, whether it's good or bad. Because there are tons of open-minded people walking around, but they have no vehicle, right? In the case of Akbar, you had this, I would say, this perfect storm of somebody who had access, people coming in and out of that region because it was so strategically, geopolitically located, right? Europe could get to it, different parts of the world could get to it. There's a base of money, there's a base of military strength, and then all of a sudden this person just says, this makes sense. And now looking at it from that point of view, it doesn't surprise me at all that he became Akbar the Great. It doesn't surprise me at all that at that time, India became the richest country in the world.
But then, if you look at the world now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But then the opposite happened, which equally fascinates you.
Yeah, unfortunately. But if I think about the world right now, you know that Churchill once said, parliamentary democracy is the worst system after you've tried everything else. Everything else is worse then, but our own system is no good either. If you currently look at you could say it's in a tongue-in-cheek way, but parliamentary democracy in itself was the least bad system that the planet could have. And we felt very confident about it. And yet we've witnessed in the United States very disturbing moments. We have witnessed in Europe the mess that people have made with Brexit, and the mess with the Catalonian question, and so on and so forth. And what is there in every one of these incidents, it's actually the non-respect for truth. Fake news and so on is really the... Now, you've heard about Montesquieu. So the parliamentary democracy is based on the fact that powers need to be, there need to be counterbalancing powers. So the separation of powers is necessary for any democracy to be able to survive itself, because no single power is strong enough. So they made the distinction between the executive powers, the judiciary powers, and the legislative powers, and the separation of these three to Montesquieu was essential. Well, I would believe that if you were to bring Montesquieu back to life and ask his opinion about what is currently wrong with them is that people are actually allowed to present out and out blatant lies as an expression of an opinion. If I tell you that the sun gives no light, that is not my constitutional right to tell you. If you are a blind person and I'm telling you that that there is no such thing as light, then I'm lying. And that's not my constitutional right. So I think if we are to construct the democracies of the 21st century, truthfulness, reliability of information is paramount, because only then the population is able to make up its own mind or to actually define better what the issues are. I also think that Montesquieu would say what we need to do is to reduce the difference between to reduce the task of politics to what is actually decisions. Decisions as opposed to conclusions. If you and I have an argument, we have a company together and we have an argument about what should we do with the copying machine. Should we lease it? Should we rent it? Should we buy it? And so on. We can draw up a few Excel sheets and we will come to a conclusion. You know, it's just a matter of, if you, God forbid, have an appendix problem, it's actually a technical thing for a surgeon to solve. It would not be good even if I were elected to deliver you from your appendix, because I'm not a medical doctor. So leaving things that are technical to people who actually know something about it, and reducing the role of politics to actual societal decisions and decisions based on objective, true information, not on blatant lies like Brexit was, not on blatant lies like President Trump was telling, not on blatant lies like the Russian public is told currently. That in my opinion is, and the search for truth, I think, is the cornerstone of what we need to do in the 21st century, when information is going around the globe at the speed of light, but disinformation and lies as well. And so actually making sure that non-truthfulness is in some way sanctioned, I think, is essential. And otherwise we are in dire straits, I think. You know?
Well, it's telling people, it's understanding what is really happening.
Yeah.
You know, what is actually happening. Dinis has many companies that are focused on that. Is trying to figure out what is actually happening versus what the mythology of what's happening.
Yeah, and it's a very big, I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our society. So one question I would like to ask coming back to your research, and we touched that, but we didn't go on this part, is, okay, definitely there are trends in history that keep repeating each other. And these trends normally, so for instance, one of the things me and Amrita have been discussing in this series is really personalities that change the world. And until now, we actually mostly, probably with the exception of Buddha, spoke with not the most positive ones. And even today, we spoke about some of them. They're very radical for good and for bad. So from your research, coming back to this experience, because I think I like to look at the patterns, especially to avoid making the same mistakes, and as well to see if we can actually learn with this. So for instance, if you look at Mughal legacy, he had the world famous Taj Mahal. That was probably the biggest case of his dynasty and his work.
That's
but as well,
that's Akbar's grandson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think from this kind of comprehensive different things that happened during these personalities, and first you mentioned a couple of historic personalities. So for now, for people listening to us, and we always try to go to the identity, to what makes humanity, because I think at the moment we are in a bridge of a lot of things happening. There's the technology, you mentioned Brexit and all the different areas of fake news that can actually create parallel narratives. And for instance, Imla, was the narrative of one book, the book of Hitler, which was the book as well that created the Second World War and one of the worst periods in history. So I think you mentioned as well the Portuguese in Goa. Actually, I had the privilege to go there and learn Portuguese. So for me, it was actually quite strange that in a place in India, suddenly you have the Portuguese churches that are like being in Portugal, and you have all these different contradictions. But you have as well, for instance, I discovered that the former dictator of Portugal, after before he actually let Goa go to India, wanted to. He actually never actually was a kind of at least a ruthless dictator, but he wanted actually to do something. He gave some orders that thankfully the Council of Goa didn't do it, to actually kill a lot of people in Goa, which thankfully didn't happen. I don't know as well, all of these things sometimes in history, there's a different interpretations. But definitely in history is made by people that follow a book for radicals. Sometimes it's an inspirational book of someone that is a creator that comes with history, like Buddha, that can actually make a better narrative, let's put it that way. Sometimes it's a more cruel or more radical narrative. And this happens in all histories if you go to the history of humanity. But we didn't seem to learn much, because in history it's more a capacity of the person to aggregate a couple of things around this person and then create a narrative than actually necessary because of history or society being more advanced. For instance, if you look at, there's a famous book actually from one of the biggest historians that wrote about, actually Vasari, that wrote about Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. And he wrote that history, there's kind of three kind of moments when ideas and creativity and money work together. Then the second part is when military power and money work together, that normally create very terrible moments in history. So I would like to touch from your research in particular. Okay, so we are in the 21st century, on the verge of the most advanced technological history of a moment in history, and we have still all these kind of very, very crazy issues going on. So what would be your points on this?
I don't know. I was once in a seminar on modern technology for one of the boards that I'm on, and a politician, a Belgian politician, was present, and one of the questions was, what would the Roman emperors have done with the technology that we currently have? And okay, there was a slight debate about it. And technology in itself is neither good nor bad. And so, for instance, Tiberius, who actually turned to the dark side of the force, for the lack of a better word, he would have used it to spy on his enemies and to become an even more effective killer than he already was. And Antoninus Pius would have used it to better the revenue of his empire and the wealth of the people that it's just a tool. So the tools themselves, they are neutral. It's what we do with it. And there is Saint Augustine, which you've obviously heard of. He was a bishop, as you probably know, and he has a number of sermons. And one of these sermons, and I'm not quoting from memory, so don't sue me if it's not literally true, but it ended with bad times, terrible times. That's what we keep saying. But we are the times. And if we are good, the times will be good. So it's actually the appeal to, if also you quoted Vasari, but one of the most beautiful texts of the Renaissance is a text written by a genius who unfortunately died at age 23, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. And he wrote a treatise called Oration on the Dignity of Man. And in that speech, God actually speaks to human beings, to Adam and Eve, actually. He says to Adam, I've created this world with everything that is in there, with the forests and the lakes and the quasars and the black holes, and I've created literally everything. And everything in this universe has an exact place and obeys strict laws that I, God, have put in that creation. Only you, Adam, you are different. I've created you in such a way that you will have to find your own place and that you will have to make your own laws. And it will be up to you to rise above the angels or to sink below the lowest animal. And I thought that's actually what the human condition is all about. We have been thrown into life without asking for it. We'll have to leave it presumably against our will. But in between, we write a story. And if we want the story to be positive, we need to leave the world in a better shape than we found. That's the task. And if a person finds what you guys call an atom or a spark or whatever, it's actually when a person realizes that she or he can actually make a difference in this way, not only to be happy as a person, him or herself, but actually to write that story. It's actually I've written a few books. Well, actually, leading a life is also like writing a book. And when you go outside, you can do whatever you want. It's just you who decides what is going to be in your book. The danger that our current society is in is quite dangerous. But we've been in other moments in history when things went bad too. So there is no reason to think that with all the possibilities and technologies that we have, if we put our mind to it, we can make the world a paradise. The only thing is we need to find a way to do so. And political philosophy thought that they had found the answer with parliamentary democracy. And what we've been discussing is that we'll have to add a few other things, and guaranteeing truthfulness in public discussions, I think is an essential precondition for everything. And we're not doing a good job currently, but it's never too late.
You touched on a few really important points to our series, Dirk, which is the human mind is a storytelling machine. We all know that. Stories, that's one thing we create that other animals don't. Okay. In this constant evolution of stories, one thing is clear in the mythologies that have existed: Ramayana, Mahabharata, Iliad, Odyssey, all the mythologies, Star Wars, Harry Potter, is your happiness is not the end all be all. It's you have a cross to bear, right? That seems to be consistent across all the religious mythologies, all the Hollywood mythologies, all the poetry that has stood the test of time. Is it's not about you, right? It's you have a cross to bear, and you gotta run that cross up the hill until there's some evolution of the truth, right?
Yep.
And I think that kind of really nicely sums up the point of it all, for why we're doing this series, is to get people like you to constantly remind us that there's certain myths, there's certain people, there's certain personalities, there's certain stories that actually have are worth listening to, because they say this, it gives you the same lesson over and over again.
There's this guy, when I did my executive MBA, which unfortunately, as I confessed this centuries ago, we had to read a book that is still popular, Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I don't exactly recall what these habits were, because I'm not a highly effective person anyway. But what I do recall is the book starts with a kind of mental experiment. And the mental experiment is you have to imagine that you're dead. It's not difficult to do, because it's going to be a matter of fact from a historical perspective, seconds from now, it's going to be a fact. So you're dead and you're lying in state in the crematorium or the church or whatever. It's customary to lie in state, and people are talking about you. What you want those people to say about you, that's what you have to do in life. That's actually, if you want to do something with your life, well, do those things that will cause other people to say, she was honest, she was gentle, she was this, she was that. And true greatness, whether it's in science or in politics, happens when people actually focus on that kind of purpose.
Yeah. I'd like to say something. You know, Akbar was great. Akbar the Great exists for a reason, but I've definitely seen in my life people who are great. They're not well known, but they are the great. You know, my mother would fall into that category. My deceased mother passed away in November. Now that I've had so many opportunities to talk to people who knew my mother and they give me their eulogies after, everybody keeps saying she was the great, you know. So
Yeah.
I love the concept that you can do all these things. You know, you have your platform, you have your access to ideas, and you have your open-mindedness that just creates greatness, you know.
Yeah. And you can be that in any way, shape, or form. You don't need to be powerful or wealthy, or
Yeah.
you can make a huge difference in people's lives just by talking to them, by being there for them, or and very often when you fondly remember a person who has passed away, like you were referring to your mother, or I have a grandmother that I worshipped. What you remember about them was not their checkbook or the car they drove or anything like that. It was actually what they told you, or the effect that they made on your life, the wisdom that they had, and how they showed you stuff or allowed you to do stuff that made you what you are. And it's actually true. If you think of your parents, yeah, they are the only people who have known you throughout your life. For a large part, they have made you what you are. You've made yourself, but they have at least contributed a lot. And when they die, fortunately, they continue to live on in you, but unfortunately, with them, part of you has died as well. So every time a good person leaves the earth, the world impoverishes. And vice versa, each time a new person arises and creates something new, the world becomes more beautiful. Our task is to be of the latter kind.
So Dinis, do you like how we kind of tied it all back together to
No,
find I always try to
yeah.
wrap it up for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of things because we touch both historical figures, but as well a lot of things. And I think for people listening to us, I think especially in terms of some of the things, and now I'm going to quote you, Dirk. I hope I do it in the best way possible, but there's a couple of things in your books that are wonderful. So about the paths to peace, religion, ethics, and tolerance in a globalizing world. You've been actually looking at some kind of absolute truths like black and white, left and right, believers and infidels, us and them, which you touch especially the believers and infidels. And the list is endless and should make it painful, obvious that the difference between people are inherently dangerous. So I think it's the dangerous for good and for bad. And I think I like especially some of the ideas like difference divides, it breeds prejudice, fear and hatred, and sometimes it kills. So I think that could be a great way. And I think that's probably in the context of our context of finding your atom as a metaphor to finding what makes us humans, is that I think the people that can unite, and I think you touched it as well, Amrita, can actually make a difference, both with the emotional union or both with ideas, narratives, and storytelling. And I think that is kind of the most important thing right now is how we create these paths to peace that you mentioned, Dirk, in terms of your book that I suggest for you to look to, for people listening to us to read. And I think how we can actually especially look at these big figures in history but I'd probably try to create more narratives and storytelling. And I think, Amrita, that's what you're doing with your films and production, and me as well with technology and platforms, is making sure that these narratives can be, it's not easy to be human, let's put it that way. Sometimes to please someone, we actually hurt another person. But I think it's these paths that actually make us special. That's what I would take out of this. And I'm very inspiring. So Dirk, probably I would like to have another one, probably me and Amrita will repeat it. To go probably more from one of the books or some of specific chapters, because there's a lot of ideas here.
Well, I think what we should do is Dinis, let's read Path to Peace. I've read 2 Dirk books. I have a third to go. Let's read Path to Peace and do a episode or 2 about that book.
Yeah.
Very relevant topic.
No, completely, more than ever.
If I may quote about difference, it's not maybe for your program, but it's an interesting piece of conversation anyway. If you look at difference between people and you look at management, very often large corporations try to define what the good employee is. So you have, for instance, J&J in my time had standards of leadership. And if you follow these standards of leadership, and if you look at the definitions, you end up with Jesus Christ or Holy Mary with an MBA. So it's really a person that...
Yeah.
But an actual company is composed of very different characters. And true leaders actually embrace the fact that people are different. One of the guys that led J&J in my time, the late Dr. Paul Janssen, who was probably one of the 3 to 5 smartest people on the face of the globe at that time, a true genius. He was respectful of everyone and listened to a blue-collar worker with as much attention as to a Nobel Prize winner. And his point was always that the difference between people is like the difference between fingers of a hand or the difference between musical instruments in an orchestra. He said, if we would only have thumbs or indexes or whatever, our hands would be much less effective than they are currently with the differences there are. And the true task of a manager is to conduct an orchestra, to make sure that all these different people sound together. And then you get a piece of music that is much more rich than if you only have trumpets or violins or whatever it is. And that is what I believe as well. Our world is a beautiful place, and that is precisely because it has been created by so many completely different individuals. It's what makes, we would never, ever, no one alive would never, ever have come to the civilization that we currently have. We stand on the shoulders of a great diversity of people. And it's our task is to inherit what they've done for us and to give something back to the generations that come after us. That's the human condition.
Whoever created ice cream should be punished.
Probably.
Yes. That's my conclusion from all this.
Yeah.
No, this is wonderful. So thank you so much for this precious time. I'm actually taking a lot of notes here and actually thinking about, like you said, Dirk, is what makes these kind of benchmarks that makes us special, but as well how we can actually cope with this, especially what you said. I think the minimalist, lazy narratives that create monster times in history.
Yeah.
So I think for people listening to us, please, I would suggest for you to look at the books. From the Emperor's writings, memories of Akbar the Great, to Paths to Peace, Religion, Ethics, and Tolerance in a Globalizing World. And you can find, of course, the bio of Dirk Collier's here. It will be behind actually where we have the podcast in YouTube, or if you're listening to us in other places. And we're going to put a lot of information as well to find information about the books and the links to Amazon and other places. Thank you so much, Dirk. It's wonderful to have you here and very exciting, and actually made me think about a lot of things as a CEO, as a person, and as a researcher and a writer as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.